This is a presentation pre-recorded for the draft City of Arcata Gateway Area Plan. This presentation is brought to you by the City of Arcata, Plan West Partners, Ben Noble Consulting, and GHD. To acquire a copy of the draft Gateway Area Plan, go to the city's website. Under News and Announcements, you will find a link to a copy of the draft Gateway Area Plan. And this presentation is going to review the draft plan in detail, but it's still highly encouraged that anyone interested in this topic download a copy and read the content for themselves. So just to start, flipping into the document on page 5, just an understanding of which part of the City of Arcata we're talking about. So looking at the map on the right, the yellow is the Gateway Area Plan boundary, and the blue line is the coastal zone, and then the black dashed line is city limits. So the Gateway Area Plan is just on the west side of the city. For context, the Arcata Plaza is just outside of the Gateway Area Plan by a few blocks, while the Creamery building is inside of the Gateway area. Samoa Boulevard is on the south, and K Street is on the east side of the Gateway area. And if we go to that arrow and look south from an aerial, this is what we would see. So you've got Arcata Bay in the back. The plaza is off to the left. The Creamery building there is in the center. We've got Alliance Avenue, which transitions into K Street. And then in the background, we've got Samoa Boulevard. So the Gateway area is about there. So we can see most of it from this view. Equivalent of 64 city blocks. There are some portions of it that aren't fully complete with a grid system, but the area is equivalent to about 64 city blocks. Some key landmarks within the Gateway area include the mini storage here on the north end. You've got Bud Press inside the Gateway area. Some buildings you've probably driven by and would recognize. Patriot gas station, the clothing dock. You've got Dark Staffing Solutions and the railroad, Portuguese Hall. Again, the railroad goes right through the center of the Gateway area. Historic homes, the Arcata Car Wash, which includes a portion of daylighted Jolly Giant Creek. And on that same block, same parcel, is some more mini storage here. Across the street from that is the Creamery building, which the Creamery district is entirely contained within the Gateway area, but only consists of about 10% of the Gateway area. So the Gateway area is substantially larger than the Creamery district and completely contains the Creamery district within it. Got Pacific Builders, Haliyashi, the 10-pin building, Arcata Trailer Court, Sequoia Gas, a couple of other notable buildings, Bud's Mini Storage, and then the industrial site on the south that currently contains Wing Inflatables and a number of other businesses. So those are just some key landmarks within the Gateway area. So if we go back to the beginning of the document, well, one more thing for context here, just so we understand the Gateway area in context to other parts of the city. Inside the document is figure 2, which kind of outlays the context of the Gateway area. And if we zoom in on this, we see 2 white dashed lines that buffer the Gateway area. One is an approximately 5-minute walk to the Gateway area boundary, and the other is a 10-minute walk, so that we can see what's within walking distance of the Gateway area, just for context. So the green parcels, or the green shaded areas, are parks, and the red are commercially zoned areas. And so within a 5 or 10-minute walk of the Gateway area, we've got Arcata High School, a skate park. Humboldt State University is just within a 10-minute walking area. Wildberries, the bus terminal, the co-op, and Safeway, so a number of grocery stores within easy walking distance of the Gateway area. The plaza is just a few blocks away, the library, the Arcata Sports Complex is just within a 10-minute walk, and the Arcata Marsh. So, and then all of those red commercially zoned lands. So Gateway area is really optimally located and is within walking distance of a big portion of the city. With that context, going back to the beginning of the document, if anyone interested in this topic was wondering what is an area plan, we'll cover that in just a moment. Why is this called the gateway area? And then why create an area plan for the gateway? So just to answer these basic questions, an area plan is a detailed addition to the general plan that focuses on a specific part of town. So in this case, it's focusing on what we're calling the gateway area, and it goes into more detail than a typical other chapter of a general plan. So it covers all of the areas such as transportation and housing that a general plan covers, but goes into more detail for that specific area. This is called the gateway area and has been for years now because Smoa Boulevard, K Street, and 11th Street all currently serve as a gateway into the city from various points. And so this area of the city currently serves as a gateway, and just the basis of its name. And then why create an area plan for the gateway? Hopefully this presentation will cover that in a lot more detail. But generally, the adopted housing element, adopted in 2019, specifically called for the creation of this plan, called for a gateway area specific plan, as we'll show in a moment. And then the gateway area is optimal for housing and redevelopment, as this presentation will show. So that's why the city is undertaking this area plan. And on the city's website, you can find the Strategic Infill Redevelopment Program sub-page of the city's community development pages. And within that, there is a page on the opportunity to get involved in the development of this plan, including some history of what has been done up to this point. And the production of this area plan has actually been 5 years in the making. So the city's 6-cycle housing element, which was adopted in late 2019, and obviously this sort of document takes a couple of years to produce. This document on page 19, implementation measure 12, explicitly called for the Arcata Gateway specific area plan. So it was about 5 years ago that the City Council, the Community Development Department, and the community started identifying the gateway area as an optimal location for redevelopment and for housing. So going back to the beginning of this area plan, now that we have some context of what it is, why it's being created, and where it is within the city, if you were to only read 3 pages, one of the pages we recommend that you read of this 100-page document is right behind the cover, and it's called the Gateway Area at a Glance. It's a really good summary of just overall what is envisioned for the gateway area. And it includes the vision statement, which we'll go into more detail shortly, which is to grow opportunity and build community equitably. Also on this page is an overview of the gateway area, which the gateway area is a dense residential and mixed-use neighborhood that reflects the community's commitment to equity and sustainability. And so that's a statement overview of what the gateway area is envisioned to become. If you were to read just 2 additional pages, this people summary, which is on page 1 and 2 of the document, is another really good overview that we tried to strip out all the technical components of this and really boil it down for a general audience to read and understand what this document's all about. And if we can just zoom in on a couple of these highlights. The gateway area is an optimal location for residential and mixed-use development, as we'll show. The plan allows for the growth of up to 3,500 new residences in the gateway area. And projects that provide a higher level of community benefit are permitted greater intensities. In other words, buildings that offer something to the community wants and desires will be allowed to be constructed taller or bigger than they otherwise would be. So we'll go into the details about that. And then there are multiple strategies in the plan to ensure that housing is affordable to the full range of incomes, and we'll discuss that more in detail as well. So I encourage you to read this 2-page spread. We've already looked at this map and the overall context of where the area plan, the gateway area is, Pages 9 and 10 show the relationship of the Gateway Area Plan to other documents such as the zoning code and the local coastal program and the general plan. And so if you want to understand how this document relates to others, that's the page for you. And then to talk about some challenges and opportunities that both the city face in general and that this gateway area faces, and opportunities that this gateway area can produce in order to solve some of the city's overall challenges. So there are 8 challenges identified, and we'll look at each one of those in detail. So one of the primary challenges that the city faces currently is housing needs and limited land. So we currently have an inadequate housing supply at all income levels. I think this is well known by nearly everyone. And projections indicate that this shortage is worsening due in part to in-migration. So because of climate change, wildfires, housing shortages in other parts of the state that are even worse than Arcata's, people are moving here relatively quickly, only worsening our housing shortage. Then there's the HSU Polytechnic development, which will further compound the challenge. So this plan has been under development for 5 years, well before the HSU Polytechnic idea was at least publicly announced or known to the city. And so the city was fortunate to have started this process before that, but this new challenge will only increase the housing shortage. And then on the other end of this spectrum, the city has a limited amount of developable land remaining. There are only so many places left within city limits that are developable where housing can be produced. Gateway area is optimally located and in need of redevelopment. So both of those things lead to some real opportunities for this plan. As shown earlier, it's well within walking distance of a lot of commercial areas, parks, and other amenities throughout the city. And so it's an optimal location for new housing. Another challenge that the city faces is efforts to guide racial equity and social justice. So the city seeks to remedy our national legacy of racial injustice and social inequities. Race is a determinant of several quality of life indicators, though it shouldn't be. The city has the opportunity to stimulate development designed to ensure that race is no longer a determinant of life outcomes. Another challenge is market constraints. So development costs and the cost of housing in general are currently at an all-time high. Housing demand is outpacing housing supply, which is a portion of the cause of that housing cost at being at an all-time high. And even though infill and high density are called for in existing planning documents, translating that housing need through the planning process has presented challenges in the past. There can be some reticence to seeing new levels of development in the city. And that leads to a need for growth management, which is both a challenge and an opportunity. The Gateway has many vacant and underutilized properties. And there's a lot of very low density uses that dominate large areas of the Gateway area, making higher density infill redevelopment a viable option. The community nearly universally wants to preserve the green belts around the city. And so if we're going to have new housing and simultaneously preserve those green belts, then as the community has indicated in past community planning efforts, infill redevelopment is supported by the city populace in general. Another challenge that every community is facing is climate change and sustainability. Development comes with environmental costs. And so new development can be expected to perform at a higher level of environmental sustainability, which this plan calls for. And a more robust non-motorized transportation network can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. One of the objectives of this plan is to provide opportunities for residents to live a car-free lifestyle. So as new residential development is implemented within the Gateway area, new non-motorized transportation systems can also be implemented in such a way that people that live in the Gateway area won't necessarily need to own a car. Second to last in the challenges here is an unfulfilled identity. So the Creamery District, contained entirely within the Gateway area, has implemented a lot of effort and heart invested into envisioning the Creamery District as a special arts and commerce district, and a lot of progress has been made. But the overall Gateway area is lacking a cohesive identity. And again, the Creamery District is contained within the Gateway area and is only a small portion of the overall Gateway area, which at the moment doesn't really have a complete identity. So fulfilling an identity for the Gateway area can further the goals of the Creamery District. Jobs and entrepreneurial opportunities will also be a challenge. So if the Gateway area grows in population through new residential units, then there's going to be inherently a demand for new jobs, and entrepreneurial opportunities will also grow. And so there needs to be a balance of mixed uses in the Gateway area. It can't just be purely residential. And then finally, if the Gateway area grows in both population and jobs and businesses, then an improved infrastructure, circulation, and parking network will also be needed. So those are the challenges identified in the plan, which leads to a vision statement for the future. So the vision statement is the broader vision statement. The Arcata Gateway area is a vibrant, mixed-use, community-oriented blend of transitional neighborhoods with the Creamery District at its physical core and entrepreneurial heart at its community center. The Gateway plan lifts these values to grow opportunity and build community equitably. It is a mixed use, mixed tenure, high density, mixed income, thoughtfully designed, pedestrian friendly, community facing, sustainable, equitable redevelopment. That leads us to the guiding principles for the development of this plan. So this table breaks this down for us in a useful way here. So here are the challenges and opportunities that we just looked at: housing needs, market constraints, growth management, etc. Here are the 7 guiding principles of the document. And this table identifies which guiding principles address which of the challenges and opportunities. So let's go through these 7 guiding principles one at a time. First is the plan seeks to stimulate the creation of a volume and variety of housing. It's well known that there's a housing shortage in the city, and this is an optimal location for the type of infill redevelopment that can provide a volume and variety of housing. Second one is to promote racial equity, social justice, and diversity through the production of this plan. Another guiding principle is to promote thoughtful and attractive development through form-based and streamlined development standards. City's not just seeking new buildings, it's seeking buildings that the community can be proud of, and that will be accomplished through what's called form-based development standards, where there are certain aesthetic requirements for any kind of development. Also, the document seeks to promote a balance of mixed uses to create a neighborhood district that can offer a car-free lifestyle, and to design circulation improvements to accommodate planned growth and minimize vehicle trips. The document also seeks to support the arts and celebrate cultural identity. And finally, to plan for environmental restoration and sustainability features. The document also draws inspiration from other communities in parts of their city that they have developed that the city can look to for inspiration. So some examples of quality streetscapes, some images that the city can look to for inspiration. For instance, building facades that are interesting to walk past and have high ceilings and a nice appearance on the street, tree-lined streets and wide sidewalks. Some portions of the Gateway area could be like this, with where you cross the street on the left, you can see mixed-use development with residential in the upper floors and retail on the bottom floors, whereas on the right side, you can see that it's purely residential at a medium residential density with a nice walking environment and tree-lined streets. Or this in Windsor here with a little bit taller buildings, residential on the upper floors, retail on the ground floors, very skinny streets and really well designed streets that make it for a nice pedestrian environment. In a place where there are cute storefronts and a place that's very highly inviting. And while there could be a higher density of buildings, there can also be open space across the street or, incorporated into the overall design so that there's room to breathe. And a place that's designed primarily for pedestrians and people instead of cars. So the gateway area obviously we need to accommodate cars, but should be designed with people in mind first, so that it produces a place that people want to be, that attracts crowds and attracts activity, thereby making it safer, and then also a place with outdoor seating and a lively environment. This page shows some examples of buildings on the upper end of envisioned building heights. So other parts of the document will get into how tall buildings are allowed to be. This page is just showing if there were going to be multi-story buildings, what's the level and quality of architectural design that the city would see as inspiration. So here are some examples of the type of buildings, if they're going to be multi-stories, the level of quality that the city looks to as inspirational. And all of these images are currently concepts in here awaiting public feedback. And so these images certainly could change. 2 more pages of inspirational images. If there's going to be multi-story buildings, at least in some cases, it seems like a good idea to have upper floor setbacks so that taller buildings don't shade the street. And so here are some examples of how upper floor setbacks have been done well. And then finally, open space is really highly valued in Arcata. And so can we have the type of development that is dense, provides a lot of residential units, ground floor commercial, but also has a lot of green and landscaping and natural areas in it. And so here are some examples of how that has been done well. And that brings us to an identification and analysis of some opportunity sites within the Gateway area. And so pages 37 through 40 show a table and map of some key opportunity sites within the Gateway area. So if we zoom in on the map on the right, well, first looking at this table, each one of the sites has a reference number, a reference letter. And so, for instance, if we were to look at reference site N and pull up the map, reference site N is there. So I'm going to take the map away for a moment just so we can look at this table and how it works. The table also identifies the approximate number of acres for each reference site. So in this case, site N is just under half of an acre. The number of parcels for that reference site, this one happens to be just 1 parcel. Then an analysis of existing conditions, constraints, and assets, an analysis of the opportunities of what could be done on this site. And possibly most important in this table is the residential unit capacity. So this particular half an acre site has the potential to produce somewhere between 8 and 22 residential dwelling units on this property. And then also has the potential for non-residential mixed use on the ground floor as well. So overall, all of these sites have the potential to produce between 1,000 and 3,000 residential units, and that's from a medium density, all those parcels developing at a medium density residential to a higher density residential. And so if we zoom in on one of the opportunity sites to look at this in detail, oh, well, before we do that, so the plan estimates that the opportunity sites could produce up to between 1,000 and 3,000 new residential units. How is that? Well, the analysis assumes that each of the opportunity sites could develop between 18 new dwelling units per acre and 50 new dwelling units per acre, and that each of the dwelling units are an average of 950 square feet each. So There can be really big units, and there can be really small micro units of 300 square feet, but on average, altogether, an average of 950 square feet for each unit. And so that if all of those units, say the 3,000 upper range, were in 4-story buildings, the new building footprints would cover about 20% of these opportunity sites. So let's look at an example of what that would look like. So if we go down here to this one, which is currently this industrial site here, 20% of the site is currently covered with buildings. So if you can imagine the same overall footprint of building area, but with 4-story buildings, then you're imagining the range of development that would be able to produce the amount on the upper end of residential units produced in that table that we were looking at. And this would result in the same overall amount of open space remaining on this site. And as an example of what that looks and feels like, just to the north is the FedEx building. So if we zoom out, it's here on 8th Street, the Greenway building. If we look at this site, which is not an opportunity area, but if we look at it as an example, it is also currently 20% of the site covered by a building. So no matter where we move that building, 80% of the site is still not containing buildings. So 80% is open space, parking, trails, trees, vegetation, etc. So coming back to this site, if we use this image as a guiding example of what could be done on the property, and actually our analysis actually has the buildings more spaced out and quite a bit more open space than this, but just using this as a visual example of the quality of development we could be imagining, or this example here. One thing that the site would need is transportation access at various modes. And so if we put in a couple of roadways, call the big one there Beryl Street, we'll come back to looking at that in detail, and say that we do some wetland restoration ponds, and then some 3-story buildings, some 4-story buildings, some 5-story buildings, 6-story buildings, 8-story residential towers down there on the south, and some parking lots. And then this area, a public square, we'll call it Beryl Square, because this area was formerly a barrel manufacturing plant, at least in its earliest days. And so envisioning this area being called the Beryl District, this could be called Beryl Square. And it's about the same size. This is the same scale as the Arcata Plaza. So think of the Arcata Plaza, and the red lines in that image there show building edge to building edge. So you can see that Beryl Square in some dimensions would be slightly smaller from building edge to building edge than the plaza, in some dimensions slightly larger, but as envisioned wouldn't have any streets or parking in it. So it would be a very large, generous area there with buildings all around it. And these green areas would be restoration, ecological restoration, wetland restoration, and green areas, open space. And then these white ones are footpaths throughout the districts. Some of them going straight through buildings, through breezeways, so that bigger buildings are broken up and not barriers for pedestrians to walk through or around. And so just looking at some of the more technical stats of this, that is 24% site coverage of the buildings. The floor area ratio is about 1.1, which is relatively low. The average unit size, in this case, we looked at average residential units of 1,000 square feet. We could have just over 1,200 residential units in this concept with no residential units on the ground floor. And so there are existing businesses in the existing buildings, and those could be located in the ground floor of this conceptual development here. And so that none of the existing businesses would need to be relocated if they could be arranged to be on site. And so there'd be about 77,000 square feet of non-residential uses on the ground floor in this mathematical concept here, and almost 270,000 square feet of under building parking. So the ground floors could consist of commercial some light manufacturing, and quite a bit of under-building parking so that there's not a whole lot of parking lots. And then just looking at the green areas relative to the building and road footprints, there's nearly twice as much green area as there is road and building footprints. So quite a bit of opportunity there for restoration, ecological restoration. And then each one of these buildings with an R on it could be purely residential with just parking underneath. And then each one of these that have a more direct relationship with Beryl Square and Beryl Street could be mixed use, industrial, light industrial, retail on the ground floors, and mixed use up here on the relationship with L and 8th Street. And then looking at Beryl Street, this is relatively unique in that the rest of the district really is covered with a square grid, whereas in this bigger development, there's only the one street going through, so it would need to serve a lot of purposes. So let's look at it in detail. So we can imagine buildings being allowed right up to the back of the sidewalk. And we'll come back to those buildings in a moment. Let's just look at the right-of-way from the back of the sidewalk to the back of the sidewalk. So there's a lot going on here, so I'll break this down. And right now we're looking as though we are standing on the street, looking down the street, but let's also at the same time look at it from above. So here we've got the sidewalk, and you can see that that lines up with the sidewalk there. And we're looking at the top of a person's head as they're walking on the sidewalk. So the image on the top is going to show the whole street from above, whereas the image on the bottom, we're looking at it as though we're on the street, looking down the street. We've got trees on the sidewalk. We're looking at those from above. Here's the bike lane. I'm looking at the pavement, or the bike lane marking and the bikers from above. Okay. Then we have planter strips. We have angled-in parking. Then a travel lane, vehicular travel lane, a center landscaping median strip with trees, another travel lane in the other direction, angled-in parking in the other direction, landscape strip, bike lane, and then sidewalk. So if we expand this to with trees in the sidewalk there, so if we expand this to look at this in a little bit more detail, so we have a little more room. If you look on the right side of the image, we have a woman that wants to cross the street, which currently looks like a really intimidating street to cross, so not all that pedestrian friendly. But every 100 to 200 feet, we can do a couple of treatments that actually make this a really pleasant and easy place to cross. So, for instance, as she walks up to the bike lane, we can install a crosswalk in the bike lane. So she looks and safe to cross, and then take up two angled-in parking spaces and create a concrete elevated pedestrian refuge island. It could have vegetation in it or benches, parklet. It could have outdoor seating for restaurants that are just off to the right of the sidewalk to the right side. A lot of opportunities there for quite a bit of area, taking up 2 parking spaces. But now we have a full pedestrian refuge island, so a really safe place for a pedestrian to be. Then a crosswalk. So now our pedestrian so far has only had to cross 1 lane of vehicular traffic. Another crosswalk, but has a pedestrian refuge island in the middle, so it's safe to cross there. And then another 2 parking spaces taken up with another pedestrian refuge island, which could be vegetated or include a number of potential amenities. Crosswalk across the bike lane, and now our pedestrian is safely on the other side of the street. So again, this treatment could be done every couple of 100 feet so that it's easy to cross. And a standard city block is about 300 feet, 250 feet long. So it would be about a city block that we could do this treatment, down Beryl Street. So very pedestrian friendly with 2 separate vehicular crossings for the street. Also, if we go down the street a little bit, we can install bus stops. So if we take up 4 of these angled-in parking spaces and create a bus stop and a nice bus shelter with some solar panels on top, then the bus can pull up and people can, get on transit, and then the bus continues on to the vehicular lane. So this can have a full suite of mobility modes. And in addition, Given its length and the number of angled-in parking spaces designed into this, it could have approximately 500 on-street parking spaces, which greatly reduces the need for off-street parking lots. So this is the most efficient way to provide parking spaces, which diminishes the need for more asphalt, allows us to have more green space with those buildings. And a lot of the buildings, as shown in this concept, have under-building parking. And then obviously, this would all have a nice relationship with the neighboring buildings, which would provide residential on the upper floors and opportunities for jobs and retail on the ground floors. And like I said, these treatments, bus stops, or pedestrian crossings could occur every couple of 100 feet across the entire length of Beryl Street. And this could be a very green tree-lined street so that it is a open space amenity in and of itself in its entire length. So that's just one example, looking at a couple of these opportunity sites collectively in the area that we're calling the Beryl District, which currently looks like this from Samoa Boulevard. And that is Site K. Looking at other opportunity sites, just at a quick glance, looking up at the north at Site A, looks like this, a lot of opportunity there for redevelopment. Site G has great opportunities for redevelopment and restoration. This is still Site G. Site J, currently residential and could be affordable housing, residential, where all of the current residents could be provided opportunities for equivalent priced residential units, but at a higher level of density. Then you've got this gas site here, right in the heart of the district, walking distance to the plaza, definitely a great opportunity for redevelopment. And this mini storage, same thing, a whole city block, single parcel. So there are a number of great opportunities in the Gateway area. What those opportunity sites can do and all of the parcels within the area comes down to the land use designations that would be applied through this plan, of which there are 4 currently envisioned and proposed. So one of them is the Gateway Beryl District that we just talked about. And so that would allow that campus style kind of development with a single street, bigger buildings, lots of open space, a real opportunity there for this overall site to provide quite a bit of housing and a really unique, enjoyable addition to the city. Then the Gateway hubs kind of in the center of the Gateway area, also envisioned for higher levels of density, and it contains some real good opportunity sites in there. The Gateway Corridor is along Samoa Boulevard, K Street, and L Street. As we talk about mobility in a moment and the transportation network, the Gateway Corridor is likely to have the kind of requirements that ground floor retail is required on street corners, and so that it's designed more for people that are coming and going throughout the district or the area. And then Gateway Neighborhood land use designation are buffers from the other land use designations between the other areas and existing residential neighborhoods so that they buffer any potential taller buildings or denser development. So those are Gateway Neighborhood. So the details of each of those can be found on page 43 and encourage you to read those. The same chapter also looks at target land use mixes, probably most importantly, the target maximum number of dwelling units identified in each one of those land use designations, with substantially more residential units envisioned in the Beryl District and the Gateway Hub, with the corridor and the neighborhoods having fewer residential units. And then this gets into the policy chapters of the area plan. So just as an example, can't go over all of the policies, which just take too long. Just as an example of what policies are, what they look and feel like. Policy 1E is form-based design standards. So the city should apply form-based design standards that allow high-density, multi-story buildings while simultaneously requiring a vibrant, community-oriented, street-facing built environment designed to fit a human-centered scale. And so it's basic guidance for the city on how to envision development in the Gateway area. And then many of the policy chapters also include land use programs. There's more or less action items for the city. And so this one is for the city to adopt a gateway zoning code as a section of the city's land use code to implement the policies of this plan. And so policies provide general guidance. This program says that the city needs to adopt a specific zoning code just for this gateway area to get into the detail of what buildings should look like and how tall they can be, and other development details. The next policy chapter is community benefits and development standards. This both identifies in a general sense the level of development that could occur and what buildings would have to provide to the community in order to achieve those levels of development. And this all would need to be detailed out in the pending gateway zoning code that I just mentioned. So the categories of community amenities are the things that a development can provide, basically break down into these. The creation of different kinds of housing, which goes into a number of details on what kinds of housing the city is looking for. Arts and cultural amenities, open space amenities, green buildings and sustainability, active and alternate transportation, enhanced architectural features and exterior design, and retail and job creation. So these are categories of areas that a lot of the committees and commissions of the city have identified as the types of things that a development can provide to the community in exchange for enhanced development potential. So the next page shows us an example of detail of how this could work. And so looking at table 7 here, I encourage you to look at that in detail. We'll look at it more, but this may be an easier way to look at it. So if we zoom in on this and break it down, we've got a sidewalk and we're looking on a profile here. And we've got a person on the sidewalk. There's a property line, street tree, so they're facing the street. There's a parallel parked car, 2 lanes of traffic, just for context. And this person's standing next to a 1-story building. We can say 2nd-story building. You'll see how that the 2nd floor is a little smaller than the 1st floor. So we can have a standard that the 1st floor has a certain required floor to ceiling height. This probably would be the case along the gateway corridor where buildings are going to have a more prominent relationship with the street. And then a 3rd-story building and 4th story. So this is as tall as buildings are currently allowed in the city. And so that's our base standard, up to 4 stories. So, under the current zoning code and current requirements, this is what developments can currently provide. This gateway area plan envisions an enhanced system in which if someone provides a certain level of community benefits, then they can go an additional story beyond what they've been allowed up to this point. So just as a really basic example, it would be more requirements than this and more detail, but just as a basic example, if they provide indoor bike lockers so that people that work or live in the building have an easier time utilizing bikes, then they could potentially build an additional story. And then there's a community benefit bonus tier level 2, where if they provided something like ground floor retail spaces of a certain design aesthetic, then they could go up to 6 stories. And up to 7 stories if they provided some amount of affordable housing units, say 20 or 30% of the overall units in the overall building are deed restricted affordable. And then potentially even in some of the land use designations, such as the Beryl District, go up to 8 stories if they provided rooftop solar. And so collectively have to provide all of these things in order to get each of those additional floors. But then there's things to think about, or the system could be changed so that the base standard is 3 and you can only go up to 7, or the base standard is 2 and you can only go up to 6. There's a lot of different ways to arrange this. And another thing to think about is solar access and shading and shadows. So if, just as an example, a 3-story building casts a shadow out into the street, in the winter, and where a 4th floor would start to cast a shadow that would touch the building across the street, We can have additional setback standards that can apply above the third floor so that that fourth floor only casts a shadow onto itself and has no additional shadow impacts than a 3-story building would have. And then an additional floor would also not have any additional impacts, and another floor above that maybe is at the point at which it reaches the building across the street. And so these kinds of details are really what needs to be developed in the Gateway Zoning Code, but this document calls for that sort of analysis and says that there should be some level of additional setback standards above the third floor. So how would this community amenity program work in more detail? At a conceptual level, if we zoom in on this, this says that the maximum number of stories that these different community benefit bonus tracks can provide is somewhere between 4 and 8. And as we indicated, the current system is 4, and so a developer would not need to necessarily even entertain anything above 4. They could just work under the system that currently exists. But if they were interested in starting to provide some of these identified community amenities, then they can start explore the possibility of going up to additional stories in some of those land use designations. Obviously not in the Gateway neighborhood, couldn't go up to 8 floors. And then each one of these community benefit tracks would require a certain number of points that you have to acquire through a system of community amenity points. So if we look at another table here, just conceptually, and this would need to be developed in detail in the Gateway Zoning Code, there's these categories. We looked at those categories of community amenities before. One of them was housing creation. So for instance, if a development produces owner-occupied housing, so it's condoized so that people can actually buy their unit, even if it's in what would be thought of as an apartment building. You can look at the percent of total residential units that are owner-occupied, and the higher the percent that are owner-occupied, the higher the number of points issued to the development. And that incentivizes people to make their some of the units owner-occupied so that they can add extra floors. Or certain percent are deed-restricted affordable housing, or a certain percent are small, which makes them inherently more affordable. So there's deed-restricted affordable housing, where the developer is required, obligated by law, to make sure that the units are only so much in rent. There's another way to do that so that it's not deed restricted, but they're just inherently smaller, which makes them inherently more affordable. So looking at those, just as an example, owner-occupied, the percent of total units, say 5% of owner-occupied units could be 1 point, and 25% of owner-occupied units could be 5 points. Or deed restricted, certain percent, the more percent increase, the more points you get. All of those percentages are adjustable in the Gateway Zoning Code that's to be developed. Some other examples, active and alternative transportation amenities. So electric vehicle charging or parking stations or parking spaces. So, the number of parking spaces per square footage of building area, or the amount of linear feet of creek daylighting could add up to a certain number of points, or murals that are built into a project, total square feet of murals, or LEED certification or equivalent of LEED certification. So that's green building standards. So that's generally how the community benefit program would work in concept, which is all laid out here in this document and indicates that the Gateway Zoning Code really needs to develop the details of how that is actually implemented. Then there's a policy chapter on housing. The community benefit program. The action item here is to create that program and then to review it periodically to make sure that it's actually working. And then housing, just as an example of a couple of the policies here, plan for an approximate maximum of 3,500 new residential units, encourage a range of unit sizes from micro units to units with 3 or more bedrooms, encourage a mix of both owner-occupied and rental housing. So that's just a sampling of some of the housing policies. There are also policies on employment and policies on encouraging and incentivizing arts and culture. There's policies on open space and conservation, which we can look at just briefly. So this plan envisions 4 different types of open space within the Gateway area, and those are shown here on this map. So if we just look at this legend here, there are linear parks, and there is a new community square, the location to be determined somewhere in the Beryl district. And then there are passive open spaces, kind of more wet, denser, willow, wetland restoration areas that are kind of hard to access, but good for wildlife, and can have trails next to them. And then this red box area would be private open space requirements built into the Gateway area code that requires the developments that occur in that particular area to include some privately owned, publicly available open spaces, so that there are mini parks and other open space amenities inside a private development. And so there's a number of open space and conservation policies and programs, and then finally looking at the mobility system of the overall Gateway area. So this is a detailed section, largely because 20% of the overall Gateway area is public right-of-way, and so while the city can set standards for what happens on private development, private parcels, the city really needs to set the tone for the public right-of-way, and what the city chooses to do in the public right-of-way is really going to influence how the ultimate development of the overall Gateway area occurs. And so this section has those details to set the tone for the city. And these two maps side by side show the vehicular circulation and the active circulation systems as envisioned. So let's just go over each of these in detail here. So in this map, the white are existing and yellow are proposed. So let's look at this just so we can understand it. So the plaza there is outlined in red, and G Street is one-way northbound, and H Street is one-way southbound, so that these two parallel roadways serve as what's called a one-way couplet. There are two roads that function as one, with north and southbound traffic separated by an entire city block. Likewise, 8th Street is and 9th Street, westbound one-way up to I Street, and eastbound one-way from I Street to its extent on the east side. And the fact that the plaza is surrounded by these 4 one-way roads is part of what makes the plaza feel special. It's a central hub where these one-way roads all come together. And so if we look at G Street as it exists, and just to understand it a little bit better, we've got building frontage zone, which is at the back of the sidewalk. Then we have the pedestrian or sidewalk zone. We have a parallel parking zone, 2 lanes of vehicular travel, a bike lane, parallel parking zone, the pedestrian zone, sidewalk, and then the building frontage zone. So putting all those together, a lot of that total right-of-way is currently taken up by vehicular circulation, parking, and travel lane. So we'll come back to that, just understanding the general right-of-way as it exists on G and H Street. As I said, this plan envisions some changes to the areas in yellow, so let's look at those. Up to this point, I've been showing you things in white that are existing. So this plan envisions continuing the one-way of 8th and 9th Street to the west, so that all of 8th Street is westbound one-way and all of 9th Street is eastbound one-way. And this is shown in detail on page 77, and so we can look at this. And so just as an example, 9th Street has a sidewalk and then a bike lane, 1 lane of westbound vehicular traffic, and then angled in parking. So by taking all the parking that was formerly or is currently parallel parking on both sides and putting it all on one side, you end up with the same amount of parking generally, but all of the cars are on one side of the street, making it easier for the bike lane to function. This also provides you the opportunity to have these enhanced bulb outs so that crosswalks are half the length they otherwise would be. And the same general treatment is done for 8th Street with some modifications to angled in versus parallel parking depending on sidewalk width. Then we've got K Street and L Street. And so currently L Street is segmented so that it only exists in some portions envisioned to extend the entire length of its right of way. And K Street is currently two ways, two lanes, one in each direction, but it would change so that it's northbound only up to this segment of Alliance, and then L Street would in its entirety be southbound only. So that they would function as a one-way couplet as well. And that is detailed on page 74. And if we just look at a little cross section here, we have sidewalk, parallel parking, vehicular travel lane, a buffered bike lane, and sidewalk again. And again, this provides opportunities for enhanced bulb outs and shortened crosswalks. The north end of K and L Street, how they all come together is relatively complex. So just looking at this, Alliance is, if you were coming southbound on Alliance, you would turn onto L Street and continue all the way southbound until you got to Samoa Boulevard. If you're coming northbound on K Street, it's only northbound until you get to this point in Alliance, at which point it becomes two-way again. So that's generally the traffic flow that you would see for K and L and Alliance. And all of the other roads stay exactly as they are, which is two ways in both directions. So that it's only the roads in yellow that would change in the gateway area, and all the others would, their vehicular flow would stay as they are. So just as an example of how this would all work, suppose you were at the plaza and you wanted to get to the Creamery building. What would your experience be like as a pedestrian walking from the plaza to the Creamery building? So this wouldn't change. 9th Street would be the way it is. So you're on the sidewalk. You're walking along the sidewalk. It's at this point at I Street where it changes from one-way vehicular to two-way vehicular. But as a pedestrian, you know, that changing from one-way to one-way wouldn't really be a big experience or change for you. Still traveling along 9th Street until you get to K Street. Let's suppose you're right here on this corner of 9th and K. And you want to cross the crosswalk. So we're looking at K Street and you were just in the bottom right-hand corner here and wanting to cross over there. So let's put you back here and see what your experience would be like from looking from above. So again, you're at that spot. Our picture was just taken from that angle looking in that direction. So you want to cross this crosswalk. Well, currently the way it's set up is there are two lanes of vehicular travel, one in each direction. So you have to think about cars coming from both directions and parallel parked cars on both sides and some bikes in the Sharrow there. As envisioned, though, K Street would only be northbound, only one lane of vehicular traffic coming in one direction. And 9th Street is also one way, so there's only one lane of travel traveling in that direction westbound. So that you only have to worry about two lanes of traffic, whereas currently you're worried about four, two northbound, southbound, eastbound, and westbound. And the system allows these enhanced bulb outs so that your pedestrian crossing distance is half of what it otherwise would be. So right now, as it currently exists, as you're crossing that street, you have to worry about westbound cars potentially taking a right to go northbound. You have to worry about northbound cars on K Street, southbound cars on K Street, and eastbound cars on 9th Street taking a left onto K Street to turn northbound. Whereas in the envisioned system, you only have to worry about westbound cars on 9th Street taking a right and northbound cars on K Street. So it really makes the whole experience a lot easier and more pleasant for a pedestrian to cross K Street. And then as you're traveling along 9th Street, you get to L Street, which is currently theoretically officially the same as K Street, vehicular traffic in both directions on both streets. So even though it's narrower and doesn't really look like it in this segment, this officially is a two-way street with parallel parking on that side there. And this would change so that it's only southbound with southbound parallel parking. And so that vegetated strip would stay the same. The rail to trail would stay the same, the vegetated buffer would stay the same, and the sidewalk on the other street would stay the same. So the only thing that would really change is that the traffic would be officially one lane southbound with one lane of parallel parking. And this is detailed on page 76. And here's a diagram. Unfortunately, it's upside down relative to the perspective we were just looking at. So if we flip that over, we've got the landscaping strip, the rail with trail, the vegetated buffer, vehicle lane, vehicle parking, and sidewalk. So we've got the landscaping, rail with trail, vegetated buffer, the vehicular lane, parking lane, and sidewalk. So that summarizes the proposed vehicular circulation. Looking at the active circulation, at first glance, this map looks really complex, but one way to just really simplify it in your mind is to note that it's only the dashed lines that are proposing something to change. So all of the solid lines are showing what's currently existing for pedestrian facilities, pedestrian and bike facilities. So if we just look at the dashed lines for what's being proposed, that'll simplify it. So generally, we're talking about 8th and 9th streets now having full bike lanes where they currently do not. And this segment of the rail to trail would shift slightly. So it would still be in the general location, but just shift over 10 feet or so. And then all of these green lines here would be new trails like the rail to trail, so that the total length of rail to trail in the gateway area would nearly triple. Then on 6th Street here, there's a right-of-way, but it is not currently developed, and so a concept for a shared vehicular pedestrian, what's called a WUN or shared street. So that's a summary of the active transportation system throughout the gateway area. So the rest of the mobility section has a lot of detailed policies and concepts. I encourage you to read this and look at the intersection design concepts. And there's also a series of maps that show panel by panel the overall circulation system in its entirety. Nearly at the end here, looking at streetscape policies, strategies. Zooming in on this, we've got policies that call for providing sufficient on-street parking to minimize off-street parking to reduce the amount of parking lots in the overall gateway area, so that maximum amount of parking or optimal amount of parking is provided on the streets. Also policies to prioritize pedestrian circulation and walkability, to provide sufficiently wide sidewalks for outdoor seating, business display areas, sidewalk sales, bike racks, trash receptacles, and other amenities. Provide room for and install street trees. Locate buildings at or close to the sidewalk to support a pedestrian-friendly public realm. Require main building entries to be visually prominent and oriented to the public street or pathway. To create varied street-facing building facades with human-scale design details. And finally, to set back upper floors to ensure sunlight access to the street below. And there are policies detailed about those, as well as design and architectural standards, including a number of different design and architectural standard categories on how buildings should be designed, all of which will be detailed in the Gateway Zoning Code. It's a section on historical resources. The map on the right, the orange just shows existing buildings. The red and blue show designated and potential historic structures. And then finally, infrastructure and services and how the city would alter the infrastructure system other than the circulation system to provide for all of this growth. And then a summary of the implementation strategies throughout the rest of the document. And that brings us to the end of the Gateway Area Plan. So going back to the beginning, encourage everyone to get a hold of this document, read through it, be prepared for public comment. You can find it on the city's webpage under news and announcements. And thank you for taking the time to view this. And this was brought to you by the City of Arcata, PlanWest Partners, Ben Noble Consulting, and GHD. Thank you.